1. When I was 8 years old, I spent most of my free time playing in the streets near my house. I had a few friends from school who lived nearby, so I was always with them whenever I was out. Our group was made up of myself and my friends Jake, Mark, and Carl, although there were usually other people with us. Everything was great and I never had any problems. We would frequently do things we shouldn't have been doing, but we managed to stay out of trouble. Some pretty strange things happened to us on some occasions, but nothing stopped us and we always felt fairly safe. This was the case until the day I met Chris. He was 18 and lived on the same street as Jake. I don't know how they came to know each other, but they claimed to be friends. We met in the alley behind Chris's house where he was playing with a remote-control car. I was happy to meet him, but he clearly had a much different opinion of me. On the day I met him, I was only with Jake, so I wanted to stay with him rather than going home. However, I wasn't given much choice as Chris told me to fuck off and threatened to set me on fire with a lighter he had. Jake wouldn't back me up, so I just left feeling sad because Jake was my best friend. As I reached the end of the alley, I looked behind me and saw Chris setting his car on fire. He looked up at me, and my 8-year-old self could see the hatred on his face. This scared me, so I ran the rest of the way home. I didn't see Chris again for a while, and I made sure to avoid going near his house. Unfortunately, this didn't last. Despite my best efforts, the second time I saw him, he was riding his bike down the street with a bunch of other people who seemed to be about the same age. He swore at me as he passed, and the people with him did the same. Every day he did exactly the same thing, but he and his gang would chase us down and crash into us. Every day, I would have new tire marks on my legs from where I was hit. For some reason, Chris had decided that he would terrorize and bully all of the kids in this area. I stupidly decided to continue as if everything was fine, and didn't tell anyone about what was happening. Things continued to get worse, and in one encounter with Chris, he chased me down the street with a sledgehammer and threatened to kill me if he caught me anywhere near his house. For some reason, this still did not deter me. Not long after that, Chris attacked me with a whip and forced me to carry large stacks of bricks and build a ramp for him to jump his bike. Although on this occasion he stopped whipping me and decided to help me build the ramp before telling me to leave. On another similar occasion, Chris whipped me and forced me to walk a mile carrying a radiator. I don't know how Chris was never caught doing this, but somehow nobody saw him or tried to stop him. I would have tried to run, but I wasn't exactly the fastest, and he would have caught me easily, and things may have been much worse. To this day, I still have scars from that. After that, I was near my friend Carl's house, and unintentionally interrupted Chris and his friends, trying to set some bushes on fire. They chased me with homemade flamethrowers, and I was almost set on fire. I managed to escape unscathed, but things didn't get better. A few days later, my dad's car was broken into, and things were stolen. He threw rocks at both of my parents, and even threw one through the window of my dad's car while he was driving. We kept calling the police on him, and when he threw the rock through my dad's window, my dad threw it back at him. Most of the time my parents were caught completely off guard by his attacks, and it's a miracle that nobody got hurt. Chris and his friends kept terrorizing me, my friends, my family. I was finally left alone when my granddad caught one of Chris's friends chasing me on a bike. He knocked him off the bike, grabbed him, and threatened him. I never had any problems with Chris after that, but he kept treating everyone around him like shit. A few years later, I heard that he was arrested after a police manhunt, and his family moved away. That was the last I heard about Chris, and it has been about a decade, since the incident with my granddad. I'm now 18, and Chris will be about 28, but I still never want to see him again. The only thing he ever did for me was give me a story to tell people about how weirdly dangerous my life was when I was 8. I don't know why he was the way he was, but I don't care. I just hate him. 2. I live in a small town of about 8,000 people. It's kind of a country town, but very beautiful, and the people here are generally good. My neighborhood is one where everyone knows each other. New neighbors are given welcome gifts. And we even have a community Facebook page for reporting suspicious activities, and hold meetings every other month to discuss things, like the drug house, for example. We're pretty tight out here. A few years ago, under mysterious circumstances, a small house at the end of my street was passed off to a drug dealer, and they have attracted all sorts of strange people. We've been told by our local police department to report any suspicious activity. They've been to the drug house multiple times, and have made arrests, but they seem unable to shut it down for good for some reason. One night, while driving home from work a little past midnight, I saw a man sitting on my front lawn with his legs spread out, and a bicycle next to him. Startled, I was about to ask him if he was okay, when I got a good look at his face. He had blood dripping down his forehead, and he was grinning ear to ear, giggling uncontrollably. I told him he needed to leave or I would call the cops. He replied, "It's too late," got up, and rode away on his bike. I routinely see creepy-looking people walking on the side of the road, people dancing, and other people riding bikes. Many of my neighbors have had their homes and cars broken into, and my parents' van has been broken into before. One morning I got a text from my mother asking if my girlfriend had sat in her car and smoked. I thought this an odd question, and was kind of offended, as my girlfriend is a very considerate person. Also, she doesn't smoke cigarettes, which my mom found in the car. Someone had broken into her van, smoked an entire pack of cigarettes, and put them out in various places. They had to have just left when my mom went out to the car, as the seat was still warm and the cigarette still smoldering. Nothing was missing. Someone just used my mom's car to smoke in. We found addicts stealing mailboxes from my neighbors' front porches. And I've seen drugs change hands several times, all reported to the police. A guy who I went to school with from the time we were 5 years old ended up buying from there and dealing himself for a bit before dying of a drug overdose. I've recognized people going in and out of that house as well. I would say the creepiest people by far were the ones who were the most active 2 years ago, and terrorized not just my neighborhood, but several others for blocks and blocks without ever getting caught. Ultimately ghosting after their latest act made the news. It started out weird but non-threatening. My neighbor's security cameras would catch them rearranging their pants or just stumbling through people's yards, seemingly in a haze. Sometimes they'd lay down in someone's yard and seemingly just look up at the sky and talk to each other. Then they started breaking into people's houses. One thing this group of 3 guys had in common was that they all wore white hoodies, and were good at hiding their faces so none of the cameras could ever see them. They also would park their car a block or 2 away from wherever they would be. Any time they would do something new, surveillance of them would be posted on my neighborhood's Facebook group. It was chilling to watch them occasionally roll through my property, but also seeing them on other people's property, sometimes right next to their bedroom windows. One video showed them just watching my neighbors sleep through their window for almost an hour. Several miles away, a family with a lot of surveillance cameras got a shock when one of them randomly checked their security footage from the night before. He heard a noise, and while he didn't think the videos would turn anything up, he just wanted the peace of mind. What he found was that these men in white were stalking his family. There were tons of video clips of them moving around the property, peering through windows. But something was different about them this time. They all had guns. Not only that, but they left enough zip ties for each person that lived in the house, as if they knew how many people lived there. At one point in one of the videos, they looked at the cameras realized they were being recorded and left. That was the last we saw of them. The news reported on it, and I think they just got too spooked to try anything again, at least not for a long while. Anyways, that's the drug house. I apologize if this encounter is incoherent or poorly formatted. There is so much I could talk about just regarding that drug house, that some of the encounters just from the many individuals I've seen going there, and back to wherever they came from, that I could post a story once a month and be set for a year. I will reference this drug house in the future, but if you follow me at all, you will know exactly what having that in the area is like for me and many of my neighbors. Thank you for the read. 3. Before I start, you need to know that I am a 19-year-old female. I'm about 5'4", weight 144 pounds, and I'm super pale with blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm telling you this because these people don't know me. So the only thing that attracts them is the way I look, for some reason. I also live in the suburb of Paris in France. I need to take 4 different trains, T4, E, B, and 10, or T4, B, and 10, which takes longer, to get from my home to the facility where I study, and it takes about an hour and 15 minutes every day. I always have to go to Gare du Nord, one of the biggest stations in Paris. We'll start with Jerry. Like I said, to get to my facility, I need to take the T4, which is a train that is still in the suburbs. I take it all the time, and by now, I know that there are some weird people in it. Like a guy who banged his head against a glass door repeatedly for reasons unknown, or the Asian guy who speaks to nobody about passports and the secret services. But there are also people who just stand there looking at you. Usually looking back gets them to look down, but not Jerry. It was Thursday of this week at about 11 p.m. I was coming back from the movies on my own and sat in an individual seat near a window. In front of me on the left was a guy wearing sweatpants in his early 20s. When I sat down, he started to stare at me. I'm used to it, so I don't think much about it, but during the entire 10-minute ride, he was looking at me. I could see him while I was looking at my phone. He never once looked away and even smiled a few times when I stared back, so I was pretty creeped out. But at the terminus, I stepped out of the train and just forgot about it. The next day, I came back at 8 p.m. from an exam, and the moment I step inside, who's there once again looking at me? Jerry. He was once again in sweatpants, and this time, because there were so many people, we were both standing up, and once again, he stared at me the entire ride. But this time I moved around a bit, and I ended up standing behind him. For just a few seconds he looked at his phone, but then he turned his head around and looked once again at me. It's not much, but it was still pretty disturbing. I mean, the guy turned only his head and not the rest of his body. Now, I'm going to tell you about Samuel. Once again, it's not that creepy on its own, but when you know that he's just one of the few weirdos that I encountered since moving back to Paris, it gets annoying. This time I was at Gare du Nord to get my B train. The E train was super late, so I had to use the longer ride. And it was about 6 p.m. last year in the middle of winter. I was coming back from the 10 to get my train, when someone called out to me. I turned around and saw a man in his 20s coming toward me. Being used to people like him, I already knew what he was going to say, but I let him come closer in case he wanted to ask for directions. Sometimes they actually want just that. But nope, he started telling me how pretty cute and feminine I was, even though I was wearing all black and was dressed like a tomboy. So I told him just that in a very sarcastic manner, but the guy ignored me. Either he didn't get it or he didn't care. Then, as I was leaving to get my ride, he started to follow me and talk to me. I kept telling him to go away, but no, he kept on following me. At some point I made a wrong turn, ended up at the exits, and had to go all the way back, and he was still there following me, without talking. Once we reached the platform for the B, I saw that my train was going to take 12 minutes to come, but saw that another train that skipped my station, but went the same way at the CDG airport, was approaching. By now the guy wanted to exchange numbers and meet up. The moment the train entered, I told him it was mine and went inside. I only wanted him to leave so that I could step out and wait for my train, but he stayed in front of the doors until they closed, which took around 30 seconds, while, of course, staring at me. I ended up at the airport, and it took me 2 hours instead of 1 to get home. Now on to David. This time I was in Montreal, Quebec, for the holidays. I like to travel alone, so I was on my own. I had just come back from New York by bus, and it was around 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. I was walking around with my suitcase in the snow trying to find my hotel. Then some drunken guy came up asking if I had a cigarette. I told him that I didn't, but he kept coming closer and asking for his cigarette. I told him again that I didn't have one, and he started to try to talk to me. I wanted him to leave me alone, so I ignored him, but he kept talking and asked once again for a cigarette. He was now super close and, all alone in a city I didn't know with a suitcase in the middle of the snow. What was I supposed to do? That's when I heard another person. "She just told you she doesn't have any." Another guy came up to us and started taking out cigarettes from his bag. He gave one to the guy and tried to get him to leave. He did. I started thanking the person who had just saved me and asked directions to my hotel. Turns out I was going in the exact opposite direction. We walked 100 meters together, and then he went to turn left while I had to keep going straight. As he was telling me goodbye, I asked him if he could accompany me because I didn't feel really safe at almost midnight with that weird guy from earlier. I could sense he was going to say no, but when we turned around to check if David was gone, we found him a few meters away from us, looking down at his feet once he saw us look at him. Then the man told me that he could accompany me for a bit longer, at least until the main road. Once we parted, I didn't see the drunken man again, and finally found my hotel. Now I'm going to tell you about Gerard. It was my first few weeks back in my hometown, Paris, at the beginning of the school year in 2015. I had just started taking the subway on my own. I was once again at Gare du Nord and was trying to leave the station to buy myself something to eat. It was around 7 p.m. and I was getting hungry. The moment the doors opened for me to leave the station, a guy in his late 40s called out to me. This time, I really thought he wanted directions. Note that he was only the second creep I ever met, so I was pretty naive at the time. I answered with a smile, asking if he needed something. "Can I have your phone number?" So, creepy guy that I don't know, doesn't even say hello, but thinks he's going to get the phone number of an 18-year-old who doesn't know him. I ask him why, and his answer just scared the hell out of me. "To make love, of course." Of course. He really thought this was a logical answer. I was shocked and told him that there was no way I would give it to him. He asked me why not, and I told him that I didn't know him. "So you don't give your phone number to other people you don't know?" "Of course not." I told him just that, and he started to come closer to me asking, "Why not?" and telling me, "Come on." And I kept telling him to leave until I was almost yelling. He seemed to get it after a while of me yelling, "Back off." And he finally stepped away from me. It was around 5 p.m. I was in the B train to get to my university. I was standing up and leaning against the seats and the wall, 4 stations before my stop. A man in his late 40s went in. The train was starting to get crowded. So he went close to me and put his arm on my left, therefore caging me between his arm and the wall. His other arm was lying by his side. I don't like being close to people and spent the entire ride facing away from him because he made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. At the next station, even more people came in, and Matt got even closer to me. By that point, his arm that wasn't blocking me laid between us. After a while, I started to feel a slight pressure between my legs, and thought that because of the movement of the train, his arm landed there. But the pressure kept getting worse, like he was really pressing on purpose. All I wanted to do was bitch slap the guy and ask if he needed help molesting me. But I also thought that maybe he wasn't doing it on purpose, and getting slapped in the face for no reason wouldn't please him. So I just waited until we arrived at the next stop, which happened to be Gare du Nord. There the guy went to leave, but right before stepping away from me, I felt the hand that was caging me on my butt. He caressed from there to my knee before leaving, making me realize what a complete idiot I had been. I went to knee him, but he stepped away just at that moment. I stood there for a while trying to understand what had happened, before running out of the train at the next station, calling my mum and running to the police. The camera filmed him, but they never found the guy. So to all of you weirdos, let's not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 241. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'd just like to remind you, if you're not getting notifications for the videos, I'm going to try and put this in as many videos as I can, so your options are to either just not get the notifications, which sucks for both of us, or you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook, in which case you will get the notifications. I'm getting better at putting them on Facebook now, and Twitter tends to automatically tweet them. So those are currently the options. I'll link you to the YouTube video. Just go there, you click on through and come to YouTube. And yeah, so that will at least ensure you get notified, because looking at my view numbers for the past week, people just, there's a number of people who just aren't getting notified. And I know this because I've had people come to me in the past. Some cases it's been a few weeks, other cases there was someone who it had been a few months and they hadn't even been notified the videos were up. And they were surprised to see I was upload every day, but this person didn't know because they hadn't been getting the notifications even though they were a subscriber. So those are the options. The links are in the description, Twitter, Facebook in there. I think Twitter's the best way, to be honest with you, but you know, Facebook's there as well as an option. Okay, I think we can wrap it up there. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.